We cover today a very important chapter in the Arab-Israeli conflict, and which is 1948, and in modern Arab history. You can ask many questions to think at the back of your minds, but one interesting question is how significant is 48 for modern Arab history? When we cover 1967 and the Six-Day Arab-Israeli War, I always ask you to think whether 1948 is more significant than 1967. So this is a question that you should bear at the back of your minds. Or you could. I would like to cover both the history of 1948 and the historiography of 1948. Who can tell us what the difference is between the history and the historiography?
Wouldn't historiography be a combination of history and geography?
No. Not a combination of history and geography. Malak?
Historiography is the way the history has
Speak up.
Historiography is the way history has been taught or explained or presented, and I mean history is the content of historiography.
Yeah, history is supposedly what actually happened, and historiography is the way we tell the story, is the way we make the argument, is the way we say what happened. So we'll be talking about the events leading up to 1948, but we'll also be talking about the interpretation of 1948 and how we have two contrasting narratives, two very different accounts of what happened in 48. A Zionist Israeli account and an Arab one. And each one has its own internal logic. It's internally consistent. And it makes some sense. And I would like to offer both of them. So, to refresh your minds, we ended last lecture with the establishment of the mandate for Palestine. The League of Nations, again, who can give a short definition of the League of Nations?
It's the precursor of the United Nations.
Yeah, it's the precursor of the United Nations. The United Nations is formed after the Second World War. The League of Nations is formed after the First World War. And it's these new nations coming together to establish an umbrella of an international organization to manage the conflicts and international diplomacy with each other. The League of Nations, as we've been saying repeatedly, gave Britain the mandate for Palestine. And we explained how the mandate had two internally that the mandate was internally inconsistent. On the one hand, it gave Britain the mandate to implement the Balfour Declaration, which meant allowing more immigrants, Jewish immigrants, this is what it practically meant, allowing more and more Jewish immigrants to arrive in Palestine, ideally at the end of the story for the establishment of what was called a national homeland. Remember, it was not yet called the state, a national homeland for the Jews in Palestine. At the same time, there was, if you remember, that long covenant, that long article of the covenant of the League of Nations, the famous mandate article, Article 22, that said that the mandate authority, that is Britain, should prepare the country for self-rule. And the contradiction is that self-rule would not go with the Balfour Declaration, because self-rule means elected officials and elected bodies, and if elected, they will not actually allow or approve of the immigration, which is what the Balfour Declaration means. So there is an internal inconsistency in the mandate for Palestine, because the Balfour Declaration was embedded in the language of the mandate for Palestine. And the first High Commissioner that is the first governor, let's say, of Palestine under the new British mandate, felt this contradiction. There's a lot of literature, as you can imagine, on this first commissioner. He ruled for 5 years. There's a lot of literature about him, his background, his social background, and his political convictions. And the fact that he deeply believed in the righteousness of the Zionist cause. And he did want to help the Zionists in their main demand, which is allowing more and more immigrants to arrive in the country. But at the same time, as a governor of this new province, which is predominantly Arab, he realized that he had to slow down the rate of immigration in order not to intimidate and antagonize the local Arab population. So his task was not an easy task. And just to give you an idea of the increase in I mean, this is after his time, and if you remember, and I think we mentioned this before, a very significant increase of Jewish immigrants into Palestine after the Nazi takeover in Germany, and a very clear, belligerent statement by the Nazis that they would really eradicate European Jewry. Most Jews, it's important to bear this in mind, most European Jews who managed to escape, who saw the writing on the wall, who understood the danger of the Nazis to their very existence, did not go to Palestine. Most who could escape went to the United States and other parts of Europe. But of course, as we will see, the majority perished in the Holocaust. So the British wanted to implement the Balfour Declaration, allowed for immigration, but at the same time there's local opposition for the immigration from the local population. And the politicians in London, as opposed to those in Palestine, started realizing that something needs to be done, that maintaining both objectives of the mandate may not be possible. And from the mid-30s, the idea of partition became more and more common in ruling circles in London. Specifically, in 1937, a commission was sent to Palestine to investigate matters on the ground. It was named after the head of the commission. And this is what it came up with. A division of the country, a division of Palestine into two countries, a Jewish state up in the north, here in yellow or orange, and an Arab state. It looks odd, and Jerusalem would have its own international status with an access to the sea. I mean, it looks like a bizarre concoction, but the logic of it is what we are interested in. The logic is partition. Is that it is no longer possible to maintain both communities together in the same country. We need to divide Palestine into two states. And that is one of the earlier ideas, earlier representations of the idea of division, of partition, of how to divide the country into two halves. The main thing to realize about the Peel Commission is their main conclusion, that the mandate is untenable, it's unworking, it cannot go on. We have to suspend it, and the solution is partition. From then onwards, the question is where the partition line would look, where would be drawn, how to divide the country. On their part, if we move a bit from the British officials to the Arab officials, I don't want to spend a long time. You have in your readings an account of the different Arab personalities, the Nashashibis and the Hussainis, the different families. I don't want to go into this too much, except to say that the majority, I mean the main position about, on behalf of the Arabs, or the main position of the Arabs regarding the mandate is not to cooperate with the British officials, not to cooperate with the mandate, not to accept these elected bodies because of something very important, because the election was not proportional. The representation in the elected bodies was not proportional, was not reflective of the relative size of both communities, the Jews and the Arabs. It was allotted equal numbers rather than proportional representation. So they thought that participating in these elections and these elected bodies would give legitimacy to the mandate, which is something that they rejected in the first place.
Two questions. This man was against the peel and the mandate?
This man was against many things and was for many. I mean, this man, as you probably, if you Google Hajj Amin Husseini and picture, Google Amin Husseini and go for images, the main picture of him will be which picture? Can anyone have a guess? It's a picture of him shaking hands with Hitler. Because when the Second World War broke out, he decided to throw his lot with the Nazis against the British and the Zionists. But Hajj Amin Husseini has a much more complicated history. He's a complicated man. I'm not a big fan of his, obviously, but he is the head of a Supreme Muslim Council, which itself is something that the British created. There was nothing called the Supreme Muslim Council before the British. This is an attempt of the British to maintain and control the country. So they create new positions, endow people with some leadership roles in order to be able to deal with them rather than to rule the country directly.
So what did you mean about equal numbers but not proportional?
In other words, the different municipalities, for example, that the British created, they had elections, but the elections were not supposed to represent the relative weights of the different communities, which you will see. It's basically up to this time 10 to 1. 10 local Arabs, 1 Jewish immigrants. And it kept on shifting a bit until it became 2 to 1 at the eve of the Second World War. But the elected bodies were not elected on the basis of proportional representation. It was elected on the basis of allotted numbers. The British had designated to have equal numbers of Jews and Arabs on the same body. Like the Senate, like the idea of having 2 senators of every state regardless of the size of the state in the United States. Unlike the House of Representatives.
And what title are they? Are they what is the body called, this elected body? And also, is the interwar period like one marked by a lot of animosity and clashing and terrorism?
I don't have a good answer to the first question. You have to look up your textbook. It is mentioned. Frankly, I can't remember the names of the bodies. Okay. But yes, clashes there were because the local Arabs realized that larger and larger number of immigrants can only mean eventually establishing a Jewish state at their own expense. So there were clashes in the 20s and clashes in the 30s. There were clashes throughout, but especially from 1936 to 1939, what is called the Great Arab Revolt in the countryside, but also in cities against both British officials and Zionist organizations and Zionist communities. So a beginning of a civil war between both communities. And I'll come back to the logic of the resistance in a bit. But if we shift the analysis to the Zionists, again, one theme you may like to think about is the leaders of the Zionist movement in Europe as opposed to the leaders of the Zionist movement in Palestine. There is a World Zionist Organization. We remember the one that was established in Basel in Switzerland in 1897. This is headed by Weizmann. He lives in London. He's close to the British cabinet. He's close to people in the British government. He's trying to lobby with them for the Zionist cause. And then there is a Polish immigrant, David Ben-Gurion, who is the man on the ground in Palestine itself. There is some division, some tension between them, but not much. There is, they both share the same goal, which is allowing more and more Jewish immigrants to arrive and starting to found institutions of the state. That is key. So what do you think some of these institutions would be? A military force which is called Haganah. That's the Hagganah, the Haganah. That's it's started as a militia, but gradually really being run as a standing army, a regular standing army with uniforms, with proper training, with proper command structure. So Haganah, so that an armed force. What else?
Constitution.
The beginning of some kind of constitution, but not yet.
The Jewish agency.
A trade union. What is it called?
Something with an H.
Histadrut. The Histadrut, it's a labor union to organize labor. And the big question here is, what do we do with Arab labor? Histadrut. Hista, D-R-U-T. Histadrut. It's a labor union. Ittihad Ummal. Hebrew. And the question with the Histadrut, one of the key questions is, do we rely on Arab labor in, let's say, construction, in building, in manufacturing, in agricultural labor? Do we rely on them because they are cheaper, or do we rely only on Jewish labor? So this is a question that the Histadrut had to ask. What else?
Knesset, or was that
Later. They still don't have a government. So the question of a parliament and a constitution is not pressing, not yet.
Honor the Jewish agency, isn't that in charge?
The Jewish agency is in Europe, but
medical services and banks?
banks, medical services,
You're looking for something.
schools and universities, very important. The beginning of, the Hebrew University is one of the oldest in the region. It was founded sometime in the 30s in Jerusalem. So they founded schools, universities, and agricultural cooperatives. So serious work, not mere talk. Serious work, laying the foundations of a labor union, trade unions, universities, agricultural cooperatives, and armed forces, and paying attention to this, getting these immigrants coming in, employing them, giving them jobs, educating them, taking care, effectively creating a parallel government structure in terms of services. We still don't have a constitution, we still don't have a parliament, because the government is not yet ours, it's not yet established. But in terms of the machinery and of the bureaucracy, and of supplying services to these immigrants arriving in larger and larger numbers, the structure is there.
And where did they get all the funding? 'Cause was it
Mostly from Europe, from the World Zionist organizations raising money, lot of money, and sending it through a complex banking system that is very independent of the existing banking system of the mandate authorities. So basically a parallel country, a parallel government is gradually being established in what is called the Yishuv. Yishuv, Y-I-S-H-U-V, is the word for the Jewish community in Palestine under the mandate. Yishuv. That is the name for the Jewish community in Palestine under the mandate. With all of these structures, the schools, the universities, the hospitals, the farms, the banks, it's in a sense the government or the country, the parallel country that is being gradually formed in Palestine under the British mandate. So this is what these guys are gradually preparing for in a careful, sometimes tense, very often tense, these are big questions. It's a mammoth task, to found the country. And this is what they are gradually doing. As tense as the relationship between them, that is between the Jewish leadership in Europe and the Jewish leadership in the Yishuv in Palestine, as tense as the relationship may be between them, it is much less significant than the tension between them and the more extreme position being taken by the right-wing Zionist movement. Of course, we're not talking about the Arabs, not for the time being. Best represented by this man, Vladimir Jabotinsky. I have not uploaded his reading yet, but you will see it, The Iron Wall. It's a very important doctrine, known, and bear with me because we will use the following word twice in today's lecture. Revision. There are two meanings of this word, or two instances that I will use them, and I will explain each one of them. So, Jabotinsky is the founder of what is known as revisionist Zionism. Why is it called revisionist Zionism? Because he wanted to revise the mandate for Palestine. Why? Because he thought it is too unfair.
for the Zionists?
For the Jews. That the Jews deserved, the Zionist project deserved to have a larger segment of Palestine, and specifically to have also the eastern banks of the River Jordan. This is an interesting picture of Menachem Begin, who eventually would become the prime minister of the State of Israel in the 70s, standing in front of a picture of Jabotinsky, who is his main guru. He's his inspiration. And in front of him is the map of the revisionist Zionist project. That is, the Zionist project should include not only, the mandate should be revised to include not only the western banks of Jordan, which is Palestine, but also the eastern one, which is what is now, at that time called Transjordan. Yes, Tariq.
But wasn't a revisionist considered an enemy, sort of like an enemy for the Zionists themselves?
Yes.
For communists, revisionist is the worst.
Yeah, this is an extreme position that these guys, these guys were not happy with. Because they're saying, okay, you know, you gave us Palestine, we'll work with it. You know, this is what we can chew now. We cannot swallow more than what we can chew. So this is an extreme position. But this is what, you know, this is a more realistic depiction of what the revisionist Zionist map would have liked to see. That is an enlargement of the mandate for Palestine to include the eastern shores of, not necessarily all the way here, but something to cover Transjordan. And this is the beginning of the idea of Transjordan being an important part of the hinterland of Palestine. It should be included in the mandate. But Jabotinsky was also important because he, more than the mainstream Zionists, understood what really is at stake. Those guys were still thinking that the project can unfold in a peaceful way. Why? Well, the local population, well, they're Arabs, it's true, and they're seeing these immigrants coming and doing all these things, it's true, and the Balfour Declaration said there should be a national home created for the Jews. But their idea is that the local population, if they are rational enough, will come to see that this is in their benefit. That the Jews are coming in with money, with expertise, and they will develop the country. They will develop the services, especially the countryside, especially agriculture, so that eventually the local population will benefit and will stand to benefit, and they will accept the Zionist project. They were under this illusion. Whereas Jabotinsky, by contrast, said, and the reading that we have, I'm going to post, the Iron Wall, is very clear. He says the following: I don't know of a single example in history where a country was colonized with the courteous consent of the population. This is what we're doing. We are colonizing the country. If I were them, if I were an Arab, I would resist this. So this is why he came to the conclusion that we have to establish an iron wall. That is the title of his famous essay, I think 1929, An Iron Wall. Enough with this business about cooperation. It will not work. You are under a big illusion. You are fooling yourselves, you mainstream Zionists. We have to be prepared. We have to create an iron wall that separates us from the local population and to basically disentangle ourselves completely. They have their own country, they have their own lives, they have their own mess, and we have ours. And enough of this talk of cooperation, and let's get prepared to the real moment of confrontation. And that is why he's, and in a sense, this is what really happened. So this is why now people are taking Jabotinsky seriously, and it was not a complete coincidence that one of his followers ended up actually being the prime minister of the State of Israel. The first non-labor, non-mainstream, I mean, this took a long time. This is in the 1970s when this man became the prime minister of Israel. I'm jumping ahead. But the question is, how do we do this? What will actually be entailed in this iron wall? And it's very interesting that it is at that time, that is in the 1930s, the mid-1930s, that we start hearing the word and coming across in official Zionist literature the word transfer. Transfer is a very interesting word. As we will see, in modern day parlance, transfer is not called transfer. It is called what? Transfer of population is called what? Ethnic cleansing. This is what now international language would, this is the language it would use. Ethnic cleansing. Back then, it was the idea of transfer. Let me explain this is a key question, and it's important to realize and to understand, and it's very controversial. This is a hotly debated issue. We go back in history a bit to this guy, Israel Zangwill, a British writer who is famous for coining this very famous slogan, a country without a people to a people without a country. It's a mechanical thing. You know, there is a country without a people, and there's a people without a country. And we spoke about how untrue this statement is, mostly because Palestine was not a country without a people. It was heavily populated. Palestine was one of the most heavily populated provinces of the Ottoman Empire. There are cities, there are villages, there is a vibrant society that has been around. This is not the wilderness. This is not an empty land. This is one thing. Second, those guys actually were the first to understand that it is not an empty land. Let me repeat this. Those Zionists, whether in England and Britain or in Palestine, in the Yishuv, had no illusions at all about the local population. They never actually believed that Palestine was empty. Still, they believed that Palestine is a country, a land without a people. How do you explain this tension? I said two things now. I said that they actually understood that Palestine is heavily populated, and at the same time I am saying that they actually also believed that Palestine is a land without a people.
From what I understand, that could possibly mean that they understood that there are individuals occupying the actual land, but they are not the rightful people of the land.
They are not the rightful people, and they are not a people. You remember we talked about what this word means, a people? A people is not people. A people is not people in English. A people in Arabic is sha'b. People are nas. So there are people, but they're not a people. When you say a people, it means that they have political existence. They have political rights and obligations. So the Zionists never thought, were under the illusions that there were some people there. There may be even many people. It's heavily populated. But these are not a people. They may be Arab people. And if they are Arab, then, well, there are other Arab countries. There's Lebanon and Syria and Jordan and Egypt. And those people are nomads. They're not tied to the land. They're not tied to the land. Whereas the Jewish people, in Zionist idea, the Jewish people are first a people, and second, have an umbilical connection, a strong connection with this particular spot, with Eretz Israel, with the land of Israel. And the idea is how to translate this umbilical connection to a new political reality. So even Zangwill, when you read his writings very carefully, he has this fascinating assessment of the situation that shows how clearly he understood the situation. If we wish to give a country to a people without a country, it is utter foolishness to allow it to be a country of two peoples. This can only cause trouble. The Jews will suffer, so will their neighbors. One of the two. A different place must be found, either for the Jews or for their neighbors. This is, as I said, the beginning of this idea of a transfer. A different place. a different place must be found. Those people, those neighbors, have to be somehow encouraged, encouraged to.
You can't just walk into a country and say, you people get up, I'm staying here, you find yourself another place.
No, but the question, but the idea of transfer, I mean, they know they can do it. They know they cannot do it. But they also know that they have to do it. And the question is how to affect this transformation. There is a deep tension, and these people are very aware of it. And their opponents are aware of it. And the question is, when will this power keg explode? When will we see a serious explosion? There are serious confrontations by local immigrants. Sometimes it's peaceful, like a general strike. They close shops and express their opposition to the Zionist project. Sometimes it's very violent and targeted attacks at Jewish communities and at British government installations. And the 1933 is another one. And then the big explosion in 1936 lasted for 3 years, and it failed. It's a big revolt by the local Arab population against both the Zionist project and the local mandate. 1939, a key date. This is the outbreak of the Second World War. The entire continent of Europe is now in flames, and the Zionist leadership, the Yishuv, finds itself in a very precarious position, because the Nazis are out there in Europe saying repeatedly in every single opportunity they have, we will get rid of all Jews. How? They don't say. And from 1941, 42, increasing numbers of rumors and stories and newspapers' accounts are filtering out of Germany and out of the Nazi-occupied countries, saying that Jews are not simply being expelled, they are being killed. Not in hundreds, not in tens, but in hundreds of thousands, in the most horrific way. So, and who's fighting the Nazis in Europe? Britain. And Britain, as far as the Yishuv is concerned, is paradoxically also the enemy, because it is seen to be too complacent with the Arabs and restricting the number of immigrants arriving into the country. And Ben Gurion was clever enough to say, I fight the British here in Palestine, and I fight with the British in Europe. And he maintained that precarious balance.
And he reaches out to Stalin. Right?
Sorry?
Doesn't he reach out to Stalin at that point?
Who? Ben Gurion?
Yeah.
Well, everybody reached out to Stalin. Well, Churchill reached out to Stalin. Churchill is famous to have said, I signed a pact with the devil and his mother-in-law in order to get rid of Hitler. I can make all kinds of, and that's the famous pact with Stalin against Hitler. The stakes are very high, because nothing less than this most gruesome, I find it difficult talking about it. This is an ugly, ugly chapter in the history of humanity. And it's ugly because not only of the numbers, but of the industrial manner in which it was done. A systematic killing of Jews. More than 1 million people, 1 million people died in these furnaces. Gassed and then burnt in these furnaces. No. These are the European Jews picked up from all over Europe busts put on train carriages and sent to these concentration camps, and gassed, and then took the bodies and burned them in these furnaces. It is the most horrific industrial way of getting rid of an entire population, an entire people, all the Jews of Europe. 6 million people died, not all in concentration camps, but the majority in concentration camps in something like this. This is the Holocaust, and it's a very significant event for European Jewry, for world Jewry, and it's a very significant thing for Zionists because it affected a very significant change in public opinion in Europe and in the United States in sympathy for Jews. This is something that no one had suffered, like uncomparable. Gypsies, yes. Homosexuals, yes. Outsiders, yes, in German society. But here it is throughout Europe, a systematic, well thought out, brutal policy that evolved over many, many years, but especially from 1942 onwards, with millions, not thousands, millions of people being targeted, plucked out of their homes, put on trains, sent to the east, gassed in these gas chambers, and then have their bodies burnt in furnaces. So the scale of it could not be secret. Of course, the Nazis wanted to hush this up, but you cannot kill 6 million people without everybody knowing about it. And when the scale of the Holocaust became known, especially in the United States later on, there is a significant shift of international public opinion in favor of Jews all over the world. They suffered incommensurably, and they have to be compensated for their misery. This is in Europe. This is not in Palestine. This is in Europe. This is in these pictures in particular are in what is now Poland, which of course was occupied by the Nazis. In Palestine, this is what we're talking about. As a result of wave after wave of Jewish immigration, at the eve of the war, of the First Arab-Israeli War, that is after the end of the First World War, in 1947, this is the ratio of Arabs to Jews. It used to be 10-1, now it is 2-1. About 1.2 million Arabs and about 600,000 Jews. That's the relative weight of the population. Most Jews settled in the coastal towns and in Jerusalem. Arabs are scattered throughout, with many in the hinterland, inside. The war ends, the Second World War ends, the Holocaust had happened. The idea of, I'm piecing together the ingredients now to see how all of this exploded. So the Holocaust is happening, increased immigration, the idea of transfer is up in the air, of somehow the need to divide these two populations together. The idea of partition was already well entrenched, and the British are tired. The British, which is the mandate authority of Palestine, they're tired, they're losing their empire, they're losing their empire in India, they're losing their empire in Africa, and the question is Palestine. They had realized early on, at least 10 years early on, that this is just untenable. We cannot keep the two communities happy. So finally, in desperation, they threw this hot potato into the laps of the United Nations, the new international organization that is now taking over from the League of Nations. United Nations is formed in 1945. So Britain basically tells the United Nations, look, we really have no solution. We give you this question. You deal with it. So the United Nations, in November of 1947, now you have to pay attention now because this is delicate and it's important. So please concentrate. 1947, the United Nations General Assembly of the United Nations meets to discuss the question of Palestine. And they, this is November of 1947, exactly 30 years after Balfour Declaration. Remember, Balfour Declaration is November 1947. Now we are November 1947. And the United Nations General Assembly meets and makes a very important resolution, famous by its number, Resolution 181 of 1947. We'll mention many resolutions, 181, 242, 147. 181, remember this resolution. 181, partitioning Palestine into 2 states. Again, it's November 47, United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181 decides to accept the logic of partition and to divide Palestine into 2 states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. An Arab state here and Jewish state there. Again, it looks awkward, but any dividing line would have looked awkward. Why? Because the populations are so intermingled. I mean, they don't intermarry, but they live in the same areas. And the curious thing is the percentage of land that is given to the Jewish state as opposed to the percentage of the land that is given to the Arab state. The Jewish state comprised 56% of the total land surface of Mandate Palestine. This despite the fact that the Jews at that time were only half the population. I mean, 1/3 the total population, 1/2 the Arab population.
Why did they do that? They were sympathizing Ma'ahum because half of them got burned?
No, it is. I want you to take this seriously. I mean, this is not. It's not an easy thing.
Why did they give them?
Because this is where they were. This is where the majority of Jews lived, in these areas marked in green. And the Arabs mostly lived in these areas. So, I mean, the Jews lived in these coastal towns in Jaffa and Haifa. And they had to extend the country given to them so that it would be territorially contiguous, connected.
They wanted access to the river.
And they had...
The access bottom on the right and on the left.
I mean, the idea, I don't know exactly how the map was drawn, but the idea is that there are 3 big concentrations of Arabs, and let us, this and that, and let us join them somehow. And there is also other pockets of high concentration of Jewish immigrants. Let us try and make them as contiguous as possible. Again, it's a violent act, and it would be inequitable. Both sides thought it was inequitable. But that is the result. An Arab state of only 43%, despite the fact that Arabs constituted 2/3 of the population. Now, to make things even more confusing, these states had significant minorities of the other people. So the land designated to the Jews had 325,000 Arabs, a very significant minority. And the same with the, I mean, less so. The Arab state had 10,000 Jews living in it. Yes?
Was the population exchange not feasible at this point?
I mean, eventually it would again be encouraged. As we'll see what happened. We'll see what happened. And then an international trusteeship regime established in Jerusalem, which was basically divided half and half between Arabs and Jews. It's messy, but the Jews looked at this and said, in fact, this is not fair. In fact, we wanted even parts of Transjordan, but we didn't have a state. This is not bad. This is not bad at all. This actually is, from the United Nations, is a very important source of legitimacy. We'll accept it. And the Arabs looked at the map and said, this is very unfair. This is our country, and we have rejected the mandate from the start, and we do not accept that one half of our country be given to these newcomers. So they rejected the mandate, the resolution. So that's the logic of these two communities. Jews accepted it reluctantly. The local Arabs rejected it completely. That resolution said that the mandate for Palestine would terminate on the 14th of May of the following year, 1948. So basically, the local authorities would be plucked out. The British would switch off the lights and leave. The question is, what will happen? Ideally, there should be two states. What we know, of course, was not this. What we know is only one state. Now, I know there's a lot to cover still, but I still have an important phase to cover. On the 15th of May, with the expiration of the mandate, the Jews accepted 181 and went publicly and said, we now declare the birth of a new state. They decided to call it Israel. And we see here a very famous picture of the declaration of the new state of Israel being announced by Ben Gurion under the picture of Herzl. This is what I'm asking. Theodor Herzl. This is Herzl, the founder of political Zionism. We talked about him earlier. Theodor Herzl. And he's the spiritual founder of the country. He had died, but of course his spirit is, I mean, that's his vision, and his vision had come true. Now, the flag and the star, there's no constitution. Israel does not have a constitution, but has a very powerful and elaborate declaration of independence.
I have a quick question. Was the name by any way related to the guy who said the Great Friday?
Israel Sangwell. Israel is an old name. Israel is, is a famous name, and Israel is an old name. Is a name of one of, it's a biblical name, and it's a. I don't think there was much controversy on the name. I don't know how the flag was chosen. The national anthem is an old, 19th century Hungarian folk song. The lyrics are new, but the tune is a popular Hungarian tune. I don't know who chose it. This is easy. If you look in YouTube or Google, you'll find. But the song is the tune, which is a wonderful tune, is a local East European. Can't remember whether it's Hungary, or I think it's Hungary, or Poland. I'm not sure. And it got picked up as the tune and the lyrics. So, and as I said, this is not built out of nothing. You remember the institutions we talked about? Of course, by that time, they mushroomed a university that is very robust, a Hist that is very powerful, a Haganah that is very well prepared, the armed forces. So now it's just a declaration of the state. But for all practical purposes, the state is already there. The state had already been established. The minute the declaration is made, tens of thousands of Jews took to the streets in jubilation in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem. But the question is, what will the Arabs do? The Arabs have not declared their state. That is, the local Arabs have not declared the state the way the Jews have. In fact, they had, as I said, rejected the resolution, the partition resolution of 181, lock, stock, and barrel, completely. And in fact, not only did they reject, but they decided to fight this new state. And that is the beginning of the first Arab-Israeli conflict, 1948. We will cover this on Thursday, but we still have some few moments, so let me try and present it in dramatic form. And I will tell you the question we asked at the beginning, the historiography rather than the history of 1948. And I will start by the official Zionist narrative of what happened in 1948. The official narrative is as follows. We were entitled to more land. We very reluctantly accepted 181. The Arabs rejected it. That was their mistake. We accepted it reluctantly. We were happy to live in our new state, in peace and security with our neighbors. But no sooner had we announced the declaration of the state than we found ourselves invaded not only by the local population, but by 7 armies of 7 neighboring Arab countries. Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, can't remember, with the intention of nothing less than completely aborting this new peaceful state of ours. But with our determination, and because we have right on our side, we managed to repel these armies, defeat them all, and push them beyond the borders of Mandate Palestine. The infant state of Israel struggled against all odds in a desperate, heroic, and ultimately successful, victorious battle against all odds. It is like the old biblical story of the struggle between David and Goliath. This is, you'll find David and Goliath. This is a very famous story in history of art. The young biblical David managing through his wit and intelligence to kill Goliath with only a slingshot. And that is Caravaggio's very famous Renaissance painter depicting this moment. This is another contemporary of Caravaggio, Bernini, and it's a very famous sculpture that you see it in Rome, and it's just David on, just the minute before he throws the fatal slingshot. This is a famous story of a young, small, defenseless, righteous man confronting a Taghut, Goliath, who's an oppressive tyrant. This is how the struggle between Israel, the new infant state, against its 7 Arab armies is depicted. It's a struggle between right and wrong, and right eventually triumphed because it is right. And because of a very interesting formulation of, yes, we had weapons, but we never use our army except in self-defense. Is the cardinal principle of Israeli defense forces of purity of arms. That is a cardinal principle. That this was a self-defense, and we ended up winning. And this is what what resulted. We changed the borders, and sadly, we didn't want them to leave, but the local population ended up leaving. We wanted them to stay, to have a multicultural, diverse society, but they left in huge numbers. This is what accounts for the sudden more than 700,000 Palestinians left. Israel is not responsible for this. We did not want them to leave, nor did we want to have a war with the other neighboring countries. They are the ones who invaded us. We repulsed them, and we ended up victorious, and we sought peace. We attempted to sign a peace treaty with every single one of our neighbors, but not one of them wanted, and they did not want except the complete annihilation and destruction of the state of Israel. Of course, this is something we could not accept. Not after we had been victorious. We reached our neighbors with open arms, and they refused to sit with us and negotiate, except way later, in 1977, when President Sadat of Egypt finally saw the light and accepted our rationale of existence and came to Jerusalem and signed the peace treaty with us. Took 30 years, but throughout these 30 years, we're struggling hard to reach a peaceful settlement for the conflict, but we were not responsible. We were attacked. We managed to withstand the attack. Sadly, the local population, most of them left, 700,000 out of 1.2 million. We did everything possible to reach a deal with our neighbors. They're the ones who are responsible. For many years, if you were an Israeli student in an Israeli class, this is what you would have been taught. I will not offer, we don't have time, but even if we do, I'm not going to say what the Palestinian narrative or counter-narrative is. I will tell you on Thursday what the Israeli new revisionist counter-narrative is.
But you said only one meaning of revision this time.
I said one, the second one I'm going to say on Thursday.